Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Thanks for being here. Today we're going to forge a fearsome weapon of antiquity, the Francesca. The original Franciscas, or Francescas as the pronunciation can go, would have been made from iron or some form of low carbon steel that was difficult to control the process back then. So we can be assured that using this 1060 medium carbon steel we can get a better result, but you think about the processes back then and what they had to work with, and it's pretty impressive what they were able to do. I've got this 2.5 inch by 3/4 inch piece of steel, and I need to work it down to where it's a little bit wider, about 1 inch wide, and so it's a little closer to a 1, 2, 3 configuration, so approximately 1 inch thick by 2 inches wide and 3 inches long, approximately. And the press, of course, makes this possible. A power hammer would also be very serviceable too. The major drawback to the press is that it sucks the heat out of the steel quite quickly, because as long as you're working the steel, the dies are contacting it, and with a power hammer, for example, it contacts it only very briefly. But now that we've got the block worked down here, we can go ahead and punch it. And again, the press makes this fun rather than a extended, laborious process. I'm going very slowly to start with to make sure that my eye is punched straight. And you'll notice that it's further back on the block than it would be for a typical axe. That's because this has more of a tomahawk style construction, and I don't want much of a pull back there. I'm using my hammer punch instead of my normal axe punch on this because the eye is going to be more oval shape than a teardrop that you would normally find. So again, it's similar to a tomahawk construction in that way. So we'll punch through on one side and then go ahead and punch the plug out on the other side. And if we do this right, have everything lined up the way it should be, we'll get a perfect little plug. On this particular one, I had to knock it off the inside of the eye with a punch, but it was really close. I'm using a mixture of beeswax and graphite powder as a punch lube, and it's quite effective, although it does tend to flare up and cause some flame. Now that we have the eye punched, it's time to begin drifting it so we can get it to the size and shape of the final axe head. And this is the first stage of the drift here, or the first drift I should say, that I'm going to use. The steel has to be worked at an appropriate temperature, and generally speaking, the higher carbon content, the less forgiving that is. And this being 1060 steel, I can't push it as hard as I could something like 1045. Some of the specimens, the archaeological specimens we have of early Franciscas, measure about 6 inches from the back of the eye to the edge, weigh about 1.3 pounds. So based on some earlier projects I've done, this block of steel should afford us that weight when we're finished. Here I'm using a fullering tool on the press to forge in that curved profile that the Francesca has, kind of unique. And many people believe that these were a throwing axe, and I don't know if we have irrefutable proof of that or not, but in any event, it would be an effective weapon, much like the American tomahawk or something similar, even if you didn't throw it. Now, it's important to keep in mind that this is not a heavy or large axe, and so some of the reading that I've done briefly indicates that, you know, up to 40 feet would be an effective range for these throwing axes. And due to the minimal size and weight, I'm a little skeptical of that. But what does make sense to me is if you were able to take an axe this size and in unison with your cohorts lob it into the air in a sort of a volley, in which case it could land on the enemy ranks in a rather more vertical orientation, so, you know, coming down on top more than being thrown straight at. I think that would be a far more effective way to use this particular weapon, but I don't know how it was exactly used. But here I'm using the round dies to go ahead and forge out the bit and lengthen it here. It's got sort of a more of an elongated or lengthened bit to this axe, and I think that's another potential indicator that it was thrown, because that affords a particular balance that makes it easier to throw, I believe. Again, the press certainly makes this nice, easier and quicker, but all of this, of course, can be done on the anvil with a hammer, and preferably with the help of a striker, somebody else wielding a larger hammer. It's time to go ahead and drift up to the final size of the eye here. So I've got my large hammer drift. You'll notice that the back or the pole of this axe is sort of slanted down. And this is very similar to artifacts that are pictured in online in different places. It's kind of fun, you know, a different shape to forge, but it works pretty good. Now I'm just working on the final straightening and cleaning up the profile a little bit here, cleaning up the surface of the bit. The name of this axe comes from the people group that wielded it, the Franks. As I understand it, the word Francesca essentially means of the Franks, or, you know, used by the Franks, something like that, but I'm not a linguist. So this kind of scared me here. I thought I had a crack. I think it was just a cold shut that I got in there, and it ground out easily and left no remnant and no indication of it further in the process, so that was nice. So it's time to clean up the profile here before we do further heat treating. I had a little difficulty getting the pole lined up quite like I wanted it. I looked at it with the drift in and I thought I had it, and then later I looked at it again during cleaning up the profile and it just wasn't quite what it needed to be. So I ended up grinding on it a little bit more and rounding it off somewhat. I was trying to leave an entire forged surface on the axe, but had to clean that up a little bit here. Just using the die grinder to chamfer off the edges of the eye and also clean up the eye a little bit. So now we'll go ahead and normalize it and then thermocycle it several times, and that's necessary and important to relieve the stress created in the forging process and refine the grain structure and overall make a stronger, more durable tool. Now this particular variety of 1060 takes a water quench just fine, and in fact I believe it needs it based on testing this in oil versus water. I have some 1060 that does not take a water quench, but that's another story. So now we'll go ahead and temper it for a couple of hours and remove a little bit of the hardness so that it will be a good tough axe head. Now, since this is designed to be a throwing axe, something that's going to take a little heavier impact, I'm going to go ahead and temper out the axe further than I would normally, so that it's going to be a little bit softer but a lot tougher, and we'll leave the edge, the front inch or so, the same hardness that we just tempered it at in the kiln. That'll give us a good cutting edge, but a tough axe overall. This is a twisted wire cup brush, which is my favorite for removing forge scale. Leaves just a nice finish on these tools. So if you're looking for something to affect that, then that's what I recommend. We've got the bit forged down as close as I want it for the finished profile, and we just have to grind off a little bit to complete that bevel and give us a nice sharp edge. You'll notice that I start with the flat platen and then go to the slack belt at the top of that wheel there, and that gives us the convex edge that we want, which is the sharpest and strongest option for a tool like this. The other important point with an axe or a hatchet is that you do want a bit of a convex edge, so that when you are chopping wood or something like that, it will break out that chip instead of just sticking in the piece of wood too much. There's a balance to it though, of course. Got a piece of hickory, and we'll go ahead and make a handle for this. This process is just taking material off, checking to see how far it will fit without hammering on it too much, and then taking it off and taking off a little more material. So taking the axe head off and grinding some more on the handle, back and forth several times at least. I find the more you do it, the quicker the process goes, but it still requires multiple checks and fitting attempts. Now that I have the axe head fit to the handle, I'm going to go ahead and put some rough contours on it that align with the eye and with the head of the axe, so I know exactly what I'm trying to do, and then I can take the head off and continue refining the handle down. This is just a lot of sanding and making sure that you're getting a good consistent oval cross section as much as possible. Finally, we get to cut the kerf for the handle and put the head back on and install the wedge. Use some wood glue to help hold it in there in perpetuity and drive it home. Once you feel that solid thunk, you know that your wedge has gone as far as it's going to. We'll clean that up with the bandsaw and the grinder, and now we can go ahead and apply some linseed oil to the entire tool here, and I really enjoy the effect it has on the hickory. It just imparts a nice honey color as it soaks in. Alright guys, well there you have it. Pretty historically accurate Francesca. Fun build, and I got pretty close to what I was trying to do. The only thing I'm a little off on is this distance between the points here. It's closer to 3 inches when it should be closer to 4. But other than that, the size and weight is very close to the sources that I found for the archaeological specimens of this weapon. And the handle length is right at 16 inches. I was trying to go for a little bit longer. 16, 18 is the range there, but it turned out real good overall. So fun build. This is something you can't just build this and not try to stick it a couple of times. So I don't know how to throw an axe, but gotta try a little bit. So let's go do that real quick. My first couple throws were off, and so as I walked in step by step, I could watch the rotation come into alignment, so to speak. So it was very consistent, and once I got into the proper range for this rotation or whatever it is on the axe, then it consistently struck bit first every time. Well, I wasn't able to get it to stick because of the nature of our target, but you can see the kind of damage it would be capable of, and so that's it's pretty impressive. That's not even really throwing it that hard at all. Alright guys, well here's some pictures of the finished Francesca, whatever you prefer to call it. Hope you enjoyed this video. I know I enjoyed building this and bringing it to you guys, so if you like this content, make sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. So as always, I appreciate you guys watching, and we will see you on the next video.